Why does China claim Taiwan, and why does Taiwan claim China? Both countries claim to be the real China, and China as we know it is officially the People's Republic of China, whilst Taiwan as we know it is officially the Republic of China. So why are there two governments claiming one nation? Well, we can trace this back to the 1949 Chinese Civil War between the nationalists led by Chiang Kai-shek and the communists led by Mao Zedong. The nationalists were essentially the government of China, but their control was really weak, as warlords also controlled different parts of the country. Now, when the Civil War broke out, the communists took over a lot of territory and they pushed out the nationalists, forcing them to retreat to the island of Taiwan, which is just 100 miles away from mainland China. Now, at this point, Taiwan was known as Formosa, and this was a name given by Portuguese sailors, and also because during the 17th century, European powers controlled in some form the island, most notably the Spanish and Dutch. Afterwards, the Qing dynasty controlled the island for the next 200 years until the 1895 Sino-Japanese War, in which they gave up the island to the Japanese. Taiwan was Japan's first colony, and they controlled it for the next 50 years until the collapse of the Japanese Empire after the Second World War. So in 1949, when the nationalists fled to the island, they were essentially a government in exile. Their plan was to return to the mainland and remove the communist government from power, but they could not maintain these plans while facing internal opposition from pro-democracy campaigners that wanted an end to Chiang Kai-shek's dictatorship. Their plans also began to fail as the international community began to recognize communist China as the real China. In fact, Taiwan had a seat at the UN as China, but they lost this in 1971 as the UN transferred their seat to the PRC. Now, the PRC's One China policy is a fundamental part of its diplomacy, meaning its allies must recognize the island of Taiwan as a fundamental part of mainland China. Interestingly, the Taiwanese also agree with the One China policy, but with their government, the ROC, as the real government of China instead of the PRC. But the PRC is significantly stronger and more powerful than Taiwan, so why hasn't it invaded already? One of the main reasons this hasn't happened is because of the US government. The US government's policy towards Taiwan is one labelled as strategic ambiguity, meaning that despite the fact that the US recognises China's claim to Taiwan and the fact that it doesn't have an embassy in Taipei, it still maintains unofficial relations with Taiwan. More importantly, as part of the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, the US heavily arms the island to enable self-defense from an invasion. The US continuously defends Taiwan, and this has often caused tension between the US and China. American defense of Taiwan is largely due to the island's strategic placement on the Western Pacific, as well as the fact that it is the world's largest producer of semiconductors. Now, if the PRC were to take control over Taiwan and this valuable industry of semiconductors, this would greatly shift the global balance of power. Now, it's important to remember that even within Taiwan, there are mixed opinions on their statehood. There are those that wish for complete independence and detachment from mainland China, and there are others that are more pro-China. However, most of the population is somewhere in the middle, perhaps comfortable with the current state of affairs and the status quo, not wanting to attack or be attacked. That being said, the PRC maintains that reunification with Taiwan is inevitable. Chinese fighter jets are constantly being flown around Taiwan as a perceived intimidation tactic. So now the question is, should Taiwan be globally recognized as an independent nation, or is it ultimately a part of China?